My manager blocked my raise and smirked if you quit. I'll replace you by Friday. So I resigned on the spot, took years of supplier contacts with me, and saw him get fired before I was even settled into my new job. So yeah, I'm the guy who just watched his former manager lose about $3 million in vendor contracts because he thought I was bluffing. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. Let me back up. I worked at a mid-sized manufacturing company in the Midwest. Not some fancy Silicon Valley startup or anything, just a solid operation that makes industrial parts for automotive suppliers. The kind of place where people actually make things instead of having meetings about meetings. We employed about 300 people across 2 facilities, and our annual revenue hovered around 80 million. Not huge, but respectable. I was the procurement manager, which basically meant I handled all the vendor relationships, negotiated contracts, and made sure our supply chain didn't implode every other week. Every single component that went into our products came through me. Raw materials, packaging tools, machinery parts, safety equipment, you name it. If we needed to buy it, I was the guy who made it happen. The role was more complex than it sounds. I wasn't just ordering stuff from a catalog. I was managing relationships with 47 different suppliers across 12 states and 3 countries. Each one had their own quirks, lead times, quality standards, and pricing structures. Some were massive corporations with rigid processes. Others were family-owned operations, where a handshake still meant something. My job was knowing which was which, knowing who to call when we needed something yesterday, knowing who'd work with us on payment terms when cash flow got tight, knowing which suppliers would prioritize our orders during shortages, and which ones would ghost us the second a bigger customer came calling. I'd been there for 6 years, started as a junior buyer right out of college and worked my way up. Learned the ropes, built relationships with suppliers, figured out who was reliable and who would ghost you the second prices went up. By year 3, I was running the whole department, just me and 2 assistants, who mostly handled data entry and phone calls. Those first few years were tough. I made mistakes, ordered too much of something, not enough of something else, missed a delivery deadline that shut down our assembly line for half a day. That cost the company about $50,000 and nearly got me fired. I learned from it though, started building in buffer time, created backup supplier relationships, developed a 6th sense for when something was about to go wrong. By year 4, I had the system humming. I'd renegotiated most of our major contracts, saving the company about $800,000 annually. I built personal relationships with key account managers. At every supplier knew their kids' names, sent Christmas cards, remembered birthdays. That probably sounds corny, but in B2B relationships, that stuff matters. People do business with people they like. I also developed a proprietary tracking system that nobody else understood. It wasn't in any manual or software program. It was a combination of spreadsheets, notes, and pure institutional knowledge. I knew which suppliers had quality issues with specific SKUs. I knew which ones would quietly extend payment terms if we were having a rough month. I knew which account managers would take my call at 7 p.m. on a Saturday if we had an emergency. That knowledge wasn't written down anywhere. It couldn't be. Half of it was reading between the lines of conversations, understanding the politics at supplier companies, knowing when to push and when to back off. The job wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it. Really good. Our costs were down 22% from when I started. Lead times were better. Quality issues dropped. The CEO loved me because I made his quarterly reports look great. The operations team loved me because parts showed up when they were supposed to. Even accounting didn't hate me, which is saying something because procurement and accounting usually exist in a state of mutual passive aggression. I'd also saved the company's reputation more than once. There was the time our primary steel supplier went bankrupt with 0 warning. I had a replacement sourced and shipping within 48 hours. Or when we had a quality issue with defective bearings that could have triggered a major recall. I worked with the supplier to identify the bad batch, got replacements expedited, and negotiated compensation for our trouble. No lawyers, no drama, just problem solving. The CEO had personally thanked me for that one, told me I'd save the company somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million in potential liability. I figured that was worth something come review time. I was wrong. Then we got a new VP of operations. His name was Gerald, mid-50s, came from some company in Ohio, that went under 2 years after he left. Should have been a red flag, but the board wanted someone with experience, and Gerald talked a good game in interviews. He had an MBA from a decent school, 20+ years in manufacturing, and a resume that looked impressive if you didn't dig too deep. From day one, Gerald had this vibe like he needed to prove he was the smartest guy in every room. He'd interrupt people in meetings to correct minor details that didn't matter. Someone would say a delivery was scheduled for Tuesday, and he'd jump in with, "Actually, according to the logistics report, it's arriving Tuesday afternoon at 2:17 p.m., like the exact time mattered for a strategic discussion. He'd send emails at midnight just to show he was working late. Most of them were nitpicking minor issues or asking for reports that nobody had ever requested before. He wore expensive suits that looked ridiculous in a manufacturing plant where everyone else wore business casual at best. The plant floor guys started calling him the penguin behind his back because of how he waddled around in his 3-piece suits trying to look important. But whatever. I've dealt with difficult bosses before. You smile, nod, do your job, and wait for them to either chill out or leave. Usually works. Gerald's thing was micromanagement. He wanted reports on everything. Daily updates on supplier communications, copies of every email I sent to vendors, spreadsheets tracking metrics that nobody had ever cared about before. He wanted to know our inventory turnover ratio broken down by supplier. He wanted aging reports on payables updated twice a week. He wanted to be CC on every purchase order over $1,000. It was annoying, but I complied. Figured he'd ease up once he realized I knew what I was doing. He never did. Instead, he started questioning my decisions. I'd negotiate a contract at a certain price point, and he'd email asking why I didn't get it cheaper. Never mind that I'd gotten us the best terms in the industry. Never mind that our margins on those parts were excellent. He always thought he knew better. The worst part was his complete lack of understanding about how supplier relationships actually worked. He seemed to think every vendor was trying to rip us off, that every negotiation was a zero-sum game, where somebody had to lose. I tried explaining it to him once. Told him that strong supplier relationships meant better service priority treatment during shortages, flexibility on terms when we needed it. He looked at me like I was naive, said something about how business is business and we needed to maximize shareholder value. Cool. Except we weren't a publicly traded company, and treating suppliers like adversaries was a great way to end up at the bottom of their priority list. About 2 months into his tenure, he started sitting in on my supplier calls. Just showed up one day and announced he'd be joining. The first one was with Reynolds Industrial, our primary aluminum supplier. James, their account manager, and I had a great relationship. We'd been working together for 4 years. These calls were usually casual check-ins. Order volumes, delivery schedules, maybe some small talk about business conditions. Gerald turned it into an interrogation. Started asking James aggressive questions about their margins, their production costs, why they couldn't offer better pricing. James handled it professionally, but I could hear the tension in his voice. After we hung up, he called me back on my direct line. "What was that about?" he asked. "New VP," I said. "Sorry, he's still learning how things work." "Okay, well, maybe give me a heads up next time before you bring someone like that on a call." That was uncomfortable. I apologized again and made a mental note to keep Gerald away from supplier communications. Unfortunately, he had other ideas. About 4 months into his tenure, I had my annual review. I crushed every metric. Savings were up. On-time delivery was at 96%, which was basically unheard of in our industry. Customer complaints about parts quality were down to almost nothing. I'd renegotiated the Reynolds aluminum contract and saved us $320,000 annually. I'd found a new packaging supplier that cut costs by 18% while actually improving quality. I'd reduced our average lead time across all suppliers by 4 days, which meant less inventory sitting in our warehouse tying up cash. I walked into that review expecting a solid raise, maybe even a bonus. I'd been making $78,000 a year, which was decent, but below market rate for someone managing a department that saved the company multiple millions annually. I'd done my research. Similar roles in the area were paying between $90,000 and $100,000. Some of the bigger companies were offering even more. I'd even talked to a recruiter a few months back just to test the market. She told me I was undervalued by at least 15,000, probably more like 20. Said companies were desperate for experienced procurement managers who actually knew what they were doing. Told me she could have me placed within a month if I was interested. I wasn't interested then. I liked my job, liked the company, liked the people I worked with. I just wanted to be paid fairly for the value I was delivering. Gerald sat across from me with this thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had my review printed out, which he slid across the table. I picked it up and started reading. Every category was marked meets expectations, not exceeds, not even exceeds in some areas, just straight meets expectations across the board. I looked up at him. I'm confused. My performance this year has been significantly above baseline. We've had record cost savings, perfect quality metrics, industry-leading delivery times. How is that just meeting expectations? He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like some kind of cartoon villain. Well, that's an interesting question. The way I see it, those results are what we should expect from someone in your role. You're doing your job. That's good, but it's not exceptional. I've saved the company over $2 million in the past year alone, I said, keeping my voice level. That's 4 times my total compensation. How is that not exceptional? Those savings are built into the budget, Gerald said. We expect a certain level of cost reduction year over year. You're hitting targets, which is what you're paid to do. This was gaslighting, pure and simple. Those targets didn't exist before I created them. I'd set the benchmarks through actual performance, and now he was acting like they'd always been the standard. Okay, I said. Let's talk about the Reynolds contract renegotiation. I saved us over $300,000 annually, with better terms, and actually improved the relationship. That wasn't budgeted. That was proactive value creation. Gerald waved his hand dismissively. Any competent procurement manager should be constantly looking for better terms. Again, that's your job. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. I understand budget constraints, but I've delivered significant value. The cost savings alone from my work this year exceed $2 million. I'd like to discuss compensation adjustments. He sat down his pen and looked at me with that thin smile again. Well, that's an interesting topic. I've been reviewing the budget, and frankly, I don't see room for increases right now. We need to be smart about spending. This was rich coming from the guy who just spent $15,000 remodeling his office with new furniture, a coffee bar, and some kind of fancy air purifier that supposedly improved cognitive function. The old office had been fine. This was just ego spending. With respect, I said, I've exceeded expectations across every measurable category. I've researched comparable positions, and the market rate for this role is significantly higher than my current salary. I'm at least 15 to 20,000 below market. Gerald's smile got wider, more condescending. You know, I hear this a lot from people. They look at some online salary surveys and think they're underpaid. But those surveys don't account for everything. The stability of working here, the benefits, the work-life balance. When you factor in the total compensation package, you're doing quite well. I'm not talking about online surveys, I said. I'm talking about direct conversations with recruiters and colleagues in similar roles. The market is clear. Well, Gerald said, sitting forward, you're welcome to explore other opportunities if you feel undervalued. But I should tell you, in my experience, people who threaten to leave rarely follow through. And if you did quit, I'd have you replaced by Friday. Procurement isn't exactly rocket science. There it was, that smirk like he'd just checkmated me. He continued, apparently enjoying himself. I've managed procurement teams at much larger organizations. The fundamentals are simple. You find suppliers, you negotiate prices, you manage contracts. I could teach any reasonably intelligent person to do your job in a couple weeks. The idea that you're somehow irreplaceable is frankly a bit naive. I sat there for about 10 seconds, just looking at him, processing what he'd said, processing the casual dismissal, the contempt, the absolute certainty that I was bluffing. Then I nodded slowly. That's good to know. I appreciate your honesty. Glad we understand each other, Gerald said. He picked up his pen again, a clear signal that the meeting was over. Now I need you to prioritize the Reynolds contract renewal. I want it done by end of week. I stood up. Sure thing. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. I had some emails to write. Here's the thing Gerald didn't understand about procurement. It's not just about ordering stuff and negotiating prices. It's about relationships, trust, institutional knowledge that doesn't exist in any manual or database. Our main suppliers weren't just vendors. They were partners I'd cultivated over years. I knew which account managers would go to bat for us during shortages. I knew which plants could turn around rush orders. I knew who to call when something went wrong, and I knew exactly what to say to keep them happy. Take Reynolds Industrial, for example. On paper, they were our aluminum supplier. We had a contract that spelled out pricing, delivery terms, quality standards, standard stuff. But the real relationship went way deeper than that. I knew that James, their account manager, had 2 kids in college. I knew his boss, Patricia, was nearing retirement and didn't want any drama in her final years. I knew their plant in Indiana had better quality control than their facility in Kentucky, so I always requested material from Indiana, even though it cost a bit more in shipping. I also knew that Reynolds had cash flow issues about 18 months back. Their biggest customer had delayed payments, and they were struggling to meet payroll. They didn't advertise this, obviously, but James and I had developed enough trust that he mentioned it over a dinner meeting. I worked with our accounting team to accelerate some of our payments to help them out. Cost us nothing since we were going to pay anyway, but the timing helped them avoid a crisis. 3 months later, when we had an emergency need for aluminum, due to a production screw-up on our end, Reynolds moved heaven and earth to get us material on a 2-day turnaround. Normally, that would take 3 weeks. They bumped other customers, ran overtime shifts, and ate the expedite costs. James didn't even ask for premium pricing. He just made it happen because we'd helped them when they needed it. That's the kind of relationship you can't build with aggressive emails and contract clauses. It takes years of showing up, being fair, and treating people like partners instead of commodities. All of that lived in my head. Sure, we had contracts and PO systems, but the real value was the relationships, the favors banked, the goodwill, earned the understanding that we'd take care of each other when it mattered. And Gerald thought he could replace that by Friday. I spent the next 2 days documenting exactly nothing. I CC Gerald on routine emails, attended meetings, acted normal. Meanwhile, I was updating my resume and reaching out to my network. I kept my feelers quiet. Didn't want word getting back to Gerald that I was actually looking. I reached out to former colleagues who'd moved to other companies, contacted a few recruiters I'd worked with before, kept everything off company email and phone. Tuesday night, I had a call with a recruiter named Anne, who specialized in supply chain roles. I laid out what I was looking for. Similar role, better pay, management that actually valued expertise. She laughed and said she had 3 companies that would fight over me. By Wednesday, I had 2 preliminary interviews scheduled. Both were with companies I'd heard good things about. Both were offering significant pay bumps just to get me in the door. Thursday morning, I had a video interview with a competitor about 20 miles away. Mid-sized operation similar to my current company, but better managed. The hiring manager was a woman named Linda, who'd been in procurement for 20 years. We clicked immediately. She understood the role, understood the challenges, and clearly valued what I brought to the table. She offered me the job before the interview was even over. $95,000 base salary, plus quarterly bonuses tied to cost savings, better benefits, actual professional development budget. She wanted me to start as possible. I need to give 2 weeks' notice, I said. Take whatever time you need, Linda said. We're just excited to have you joining the team. I told her I'd send her a formal acceptance by end of day Friday. We shook hands virtually and ended the call. I sat there for a few minutes thinking it over, making sure I wasn't making an emotional decision. But the math was clear. $17,000 more in base salary plus bonuses that could add another $10,000 to $15,000. A boss who actually respected the work. A company that wasn't run by someone with a fragile ego and a management book from 1987. Yeah, this was the right move. Then I drafted my resignation letter, kept it short and professional, 2 weeks' notice effective immediately. I didn't mention Gerald's comments, didn't need to, just thanked the company for the opportunity and wished them well. I printed it out on good paper stock, signed it in blue ink, and put it in a folder. Wanted it to look professional final. I walked into Gerald's office at 3 p.m. on Friday. He was on the phone, but he waved me in. I stood there waiting while he wrapped up some conversation about production schedules that he was clearly dominating despite not understanding the technical details. He kept using terms slightly wrong, and I could almost hear the person on the other end trying to politely correct him. When he hung up, he looked at me with mild annoyance. "What do you need?" "I'm resigning," I said, handing him the folder. "My last day is 2 weeks from today." I watched his face go through about 4 different expressions in rapid succession. First was confusion, like he couldn't quite process what I'd said, like the words made sense individually but not together. Then annoyance, probably at the inconvenience of having to deal with this. Then something that looked like actual concern, maybe realizing this was actually happening, and he'd have to follow through on his boast about replacing me. Then that smirk came back, his default expression when he thought he had the upper hand. "Well," he said, unfolding the letter and scanning it quickly. His eyes moved faster than he was actually reading, just performing the act of reviewing it. "I appreciate the notice, but we don't need 2 weeks. You can clear out your desk today. I'll have someone cover your responsibilities starting Monday." "Perfect. Exactly what I'd hoped for." "Your call," I said with a shrug. "I'll need to do an exit interview with HR. I'll let them know," Gerald said. He was already looking at his computer, dismissing me. "Make sure you leave detailed notes about ongoing projects and supplier contacts." "Sure," I said, knowing full well I wouldn't be doing that. See, when you accept someone's resignation effective immediately, you're terminating their employment. They have no obligation to do anything beyond return company property. Gerald probably thought he was punishing me by not letting me work my notice. In reality, he just eliminated any responsibility I had to help with the transition. I went back to my office and started packing my personal items. Wasn't much. A few pictures of family vacations, some office supplies I'd bought myself because the company ones were terrible, a coffee mug for my alma mater, a plant that was somehow still alive despite being in a windowless office for 3 years. I did not leave detailed notes. I did not document my supplier relationships. I did not create a transition plan or write up best practices. Gerald had accepted my resignation effective immediately, which meant I had zero obligation to do anything beyond pack my stuff and leave. Could I have been the bigger person and left everything documented anyway? Sure, but Gerald had spent 4 months micromanaging me, dismissing my work, and then told me to my face that I was easily replaceable and that procurement wasn't rocket science. He wanted to learn that lesson the hard way. Fine by me. My 2 assistants, Katie and Ben, stopped by while I was boxing things up. They both looked shell-shocked. "Is it true?" Katie asked. "You're leaving today?" "Yep." Because of Gerald, I looked at her. She was sharp, mid-20s, had been with me for about 2 years. She'd figure it out eventually, but I wasn't going to trash talk on my way out. "I got a better offer," I said. "Sometimes you have to make moves." Ben nodded. He was quieter than Katie, but equally capable. Had a good head for numbers and supplier analytics. "Are they hiring where you're going?" I wrote down Linda's contact information and handed it to him. "If things get weird here, reach out. Can't promise anything, but she's building a team." They both thanked me. Katie looked like she wanted to say more, but I could see Ben pulling her back. They knew what was coming, even if they didn't want to admit it. The department was going to be chaos, without someone who knew the relationships, and they'd be the ones dealing with it firsthand. I felt bad for them. They were good people who didn't deserve to get caught in the fallout of Gerald's ego, but I couldn't save them. They'd have to make their own calls about whether to stick around. On my way out, I stopped by to see Rachel in HR. She's good people, been there longer than anyone, and actually cares about employees, which is rare in HR. Most HR departments exist to protect the company. Rachel actually tried to balance that with looking out for employees. "I'm heading out," I told her. "Gerald said you'd handle the exit paperwork." Her eyebrows went up. "He's accepting your resignation effective immediately." "Yep." She sighed and pulled up something on her computer. "That's not standard protocol. We're supposed to have proper knowledge transfer, offboarding procedures, exit interviews done at the end of the notice period, but okay, I'll process everything." "Do you have time for an exit interview now?" "Sure." We went into one of the small conference rooms. Rachel had a standard form with the usual questions. She went through them methodically, typing my responses. Why are you leaving? Better opportunity at a competitor? More money, better growth prospects. What could we have done better? Could have addressed compensation concerns before it became an issue. Would you recommend this company to others? Depends on the role and the management. She paused at that last one. Can you elaborate? The company has good people and solid fundamentals, I said carefully, but recent management changes have created some challenges. I'd recommend it to someone who's a good fit for the current leadership style. Rachel typed that, then stopped and looked at me. Off the record. Sure, Gerald's going to screw this up, isn't he? I met her eyes. I think Gerald believes procurement is simpler than it actually is. He'll figure it out eventually. Question is how much it'll cost before he does. She nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I pushed back on his decision to let you go immediately. Told him we needed a proper transition period. He overruled me, said he wanted to send a message that nobody's irreplaceable. Well, I said he's about to find out if that's true. Can I give you some advice? Sure. Document everything about today. The time Gerald accepted your resignation. Exactly what he said. The fact that he terminated you effective immediately. Save any emails, just in case there's any weirdness later with final pay or benefits, or if he tries to claim you abandoned your position. I appreciated that. Rachel was covering her own bases too, protecting the company from potential liability, but she was also looking out for me. That's the balance good HR people walk. Will do, I said. And Rachel, you might want to update your own resume. I don't think this is going to get better before it gets worse. She gave me a sad smile. Already started. We shook hands and I walked out to my car around 5:30. Threw my box in the back seat. Felt lighter than I had in months. The weekend was quiet. I didn't think about work, didn't stress about Monday. Just enjoyed being free. Monday morning at my new company was standard orientation stuff. Paperwork. Meeting the team. But the atmosphere was completely different. People actually seemed engaged. Nobody walking on eggshells. Linda met with me for about 2 hours. She was direct, asked good questions, clearly had a strategic vision. I hired you because you're an expert, she said. I'm not going to micromanage you. You'll have autonomy to make decisions. Keep me informed on major stuff, but day to day, that's your domain. Music to my ears. I spent the rest of the week getting oriented, meeting suppliers, understanding contracts, figuring out systems. Good work without constant interference. I didn't think about my old job at all until Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. Unknown number but local area code. I answered. Hey, it's James from Reynolds Industrial. Is this a good time? James was the account manager for our biggest aluminum supplier. Reynolds provided about 40% of our raw materials. The contract was worth roughly $2 million annually. Hey James, I said. What's up? I got a weird email from your company yesterday. Someone named Gerald asking to renegotiate our contract terms. Wanted better pricing and shorter lead times. It was pretty aggressive. I almost laughed. I don't work there anymore. Resigned last week. There was a pause. You're serious? Yeah. I'm at a new company now. Damn, James said. I didn't know. Who's handling procurement? No idea. Gerald's the VP of operations. I guess he's managing it directly until they hire someone. Another pause. Well, that explains the tone. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. We've worked together for 4 years. You've always been fair, and you understand our constraints. This Gerald guy sent me an email demanding we cut prices by 15% and reduce lead times by a week. No discussion, just demands. That sounds like Gerald. Yeah. Well, I told him we can't do that. Our margins are already tight. He responded saying if we can't meet his terms, he'll find another supplier. So, I'm calling to give you a heads up that we're probably pulling out of that contract. I felt a cold spike of satisfaction. That's your call to make, James. For what it's worth, Reynolds has been a great partner. I appreciated working with you. Same here, he said. If you need a supplier at your new company, give me a ring. I'll take care of you. Will do. Thanks for the heads up. I hung up and sat there for a minute. Reynolds pulling out was a massive problem. Finding a replacement would take weeks, and getting pricing anywhere close to what we'd negotiated would be nearly impossible. Part of me felt bad for the people who'd have to deal with the fallout, but then I remembered Gerald's smirk, the way he told me I'd be replaced by Friday. I went back to work. Over the next 3 days, I got 7 more calls. Chris from Tri-State Plastics, our steel supplier, the packaging vendor, all of them with the same story. Gerald had sent aggressive emails demanding price cuts, threatening to replace them if they didn't comply. Every single one was walking away. I didn't lie to any of them, just told them the truth. I'd left Gerald was handling procurement, and they should make whatever decision made sense for their business. Friday afternoon, Rachel called me. She sounded stressed. "I need to ask you something off the record," she said. "Okay, did you do anything to sabotage the supplier relationships before you left?" I kept my voice calm. "No." I resigned, packed my desk, and left. Gerald chose to accept my resignation effective immediately, so I didn't even work my notice period. That's what I thought. I had to ask because Gerald is losing his mind. Apparently, every major supplier is either threatening to terminate or has already sent cancellation notices. He's claiming you must have poisoned them against the company. "I didn't have to," I said. "Gerald did that himself." "What do you mean?" "He contacted every supplier demanding price cuts and better terms. Didn't ask, didn't negotiate, just sent aggressive emails saying if they didn't comply, he'd replace them. Turns out vendors don't respond well to being threatened." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "He actually said that?" "According to multiple suppliers, yes." "Jesus, how bad is it?" I asked. "Bad. Operations is freaking out because we have enough raw materials to meet production schedules next month. The CEO is furious. Legal is getting involved because some of these contracts have penalty clauses for early termination. It's a disaster." I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. "That's unfortunate. They're talking about trying to hire you back, offering more money, whatever you want." "Not interested," I figured. "Look, I'm sorry about how this went down. You deserved better." "Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that." She sighed. "Good luck with the new job. You too. And Rachel, start updating your resume. This company is going to be bleeding talent for a while." "Already on it," she said, and hung up. I sat there thinking about Gerald, wondering if he understood yet what he'd done, whether he realized that replacing me wasn't the hard part. Replacing 6 years of relationship building and trust was impossible. The following week, I started getting LinkedIn messages, people from my old company reaching out, asking if my new employer was hiring, sharing stories about how chaotic things had gotten. Apparently, Gerald had tried to personally manage procurement while searching for my replacement. It went about as well as you'd expect. He didn't understand lead times couldn't negotiate worth a damn and burned every bridge I'd spent years building. Operations ground to a halt after 2 weeks. They couldn't get enough raw materials to maintain production schedules. Assembly lines sat idle. Deadlines were missed. Customers started cancelling orders. The financial hit was staggering. Between lost revenue penalty clauses and emergency sourcing at inflated prices, the company was looking at losses in the millions. Gerald tried to blame me, sent an email to the whole company saying I'd sabotaged the supplier relationships out of spite, that I'd violated my professional responsibilities. Linda, my new boss, forwarded it to me with a note. "Want me to have our legal team send a cease and desist?" I wrote back. "Not necessary. Truth is a defense, and I didn't do anything wrong. Let him dig his own grave." Sure enough, 2 days later, Rachel forwarded me another email, this one from the CEO to the entire staff. It was a masterclass in corporate damage control. The email acknowledged that there had been communication issues with suppliers following a management transition. It outlined steps the company was taking to rebuild relationships and stabilize operations. It thanked employees for their patience during a difficult period, and buried in the middle was a single line. "Gerald Patterson is no longer with the company effective immediately." I showed it to Linda. "They actually fired him," she said. 6 months and he torched the place. Gerald was very good at burning bridges, just not much else. One of my former colleagues reached out a week later. We grabbed coffee and she filled me in on the fallout. The board had investigated. Turned out Gerald had inflated his resume. The company in Ohio hadn't just gone under after he left. It had failed partially because of his decisions as VP, poor vendor management. Same playbook he tried at our company. He'd also been cherry-picking data in his reports to make himself look good. The CEO had been making decisions based on incomplete information for months. Best part, Gerald tried to negotiate a severance package during his termination, threatened to sue. The lawyers pointed to the morality clause in his contract. Gross negligence voids severance. He walked away with nothing. 3 more people have left since you did, my colleague said. The company hired a crisis firm to rebuild supplier relationships, but it's not going well. They promoted Danielle to interim procurement manager. She's overwhelmed. I felt bad for Danielle. Good kid, impossible situation. Tell her she can call me if she needs advice, I said off the record. We finished our coffee, and I headed back to my new office. Sometimes the best revenge is just stepping aside and letting someone destroy themselves. 3 months later, I got an email from the CEO of my old company. It was carefully worded professional, but the desperation leaked through anyway. He apologized for how my departure had been handled, acknowledged that the company had made serious mistakes in management, asked if there was any possibility I'd consider returning. The offer was generous, $110,000 base salary profit, sharing a signing bonus to cover what I'd lost in unvested benefits, a guaranteed seat in management meetings. Basically everything I'd wanted before Gerald showed up. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Linda with a subject line, FYI, not taking this. She wrote back, "Good. We like having you here." I responded to the CEO, politely thanked him for the offer, explained that I was happy in my current role and not looking to make a change, wished him and the company well. He wrote back within an hour, asked if I'd at least consider consulting, helping them rebuild the supplier relationships. He'd pay whatever my rate was. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I wrote back, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available. However, I'd recommend reaching out to James at Reynolds Industrial and Chris at Tri-State Plastics. They're both professional and fair. If your new procurement manager approaches them with respect, instead of demands, they might be willing to restart conversations. Good luck." I never heard back. Life moved on. I settled into my new role, built relationships with a new set of suppliers, implemented some of the ideas. I'd never gotten to try at my old company, got a promotion after 8 months. My old company limped along. They eventually stabilized, but the damage was permanent. Revenue was down, market share eroded. Several long-time customers had switched to competitors during the supply chain chaos and never came back. Last I heard, they were considering selling to a larger firm. The CEO, who'd emailed me, had retired early. The board had cleaned house, all because Gerald thought procurement wasn't rocket science. 3 months later, I got an email from the CEO of my old company. It was carefully worded professional, but the desperation leaked through anyway. He apologized for how my departure had been handled, acknowledged that the company had made serious mistakes in management, asked if there was any possibility I'd consider returning. The offer was generous, a $110,000 base salary profit sharing, a signing bonus to cover what I'd lost in unvested benefits, a guaranteed seat in management meetings, basically everything I'd wanted before Gerald showed up. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Linda with a subject line, FYI, not taking this. She wrote back, "Good, we like having you here." I responded to the CEO, politely thanked him for the offer, explained that I was happy in my current role and not looking to make a change, wished him and the company well. He wrote back within an hour, asked if I'd at least consider consulting, helping them rebuild the supplier relationships. He'd pay whatever my rate was. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I wrote back, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available. However, I'd recommend reaching out to James at Reynolds Industrial and Chris at Tri-State Plastics. They're both professional and fair. If your new procurement manager approaches them with respect instead of demands, they might be willing to restart conversations. Good luck." I never heard back. 6 months after I left, Katie reached out. She'd taken my advice and applied to Linda's team, got hired as a buyer. We grabbed lunch her first week. "It's so different here," she said. "People actually communicate. Management listens." I forgot what it felt like to not be stressed all the time. "What happened to Ben?" I asked. "He left 2 months after you did, got a job in logistics at a distribution company. Better pay, better hours." "And the old place?" Katie shook her head. They hired someone to replace you eventually, some guy from a consulting firm. He lasted 3 months before he quit. Then they hired someone else who's trying to rebuild everything from scratch, but the damage is done. Half the suppliers won't work with them anymore. The ones who stayed jacked up their prices because they know the company's desperate. What about operations? Revenue's down 30% from last year. They laid off about 60 people in manufacturing. The CEO announced his retirement last month. Word is they're shopping the company around trying to find a buyer. I nodded. Wasn't surprising, but still sobering to hear.